Okay. So very good evening to you who joined little late, and welcome you all once again to this API management session. My name is Devalina. You can call me Deb. I am going to be your instructor for this 5 days, including today. So in this session, we are going to cover the API management tools. First, we will try to understand what is API management is all about and how Software AG's web methods products are helpful in achieving a successful API management landscape, and also what tools to use to build this API management platform. Um, I have slides available. Our focus will mostly be around API Gateway and Developers Portal, or previously known as API Portal. Just bear with me for a minute. So our focus will be primarily on these two tools. So this is the agenda I have prepared for this 5 days session. I'm not sure if you have had a chance to look at it. So these are the topics, mostly from API Gateway, and on day 4 and 5, we will talk about Developer Portal. So these are the topics I will be covering. I have a few slides with me, but I'll try to use the tools as much as possible and present some demos to you, except for the first one, which is API management and platform overview. So this will be mostly a theoretical one. After that, my presentation will be more demo oriented. Okay. So I shared this agenda with Yusuf and Natarajan. So if you get a chance, please take a look at it. And if you need any topics to be covered in detail, please let me know. I'll try to fit that into this agenda. Okay. So let's start with our very first topic on API management. Just before that, I want to go through this slides, just a couple more slides. Uh, I'm not sure if all of you are very new to this API management platform of Software AG, or do you have any previous experience of working on this tool? I'm asking this question to you all, so feel free to let me know what is your comfort level with API Gateway or Developer Portal. Have you had a chance to work on these tools before, or this is the first time you are going to work on them?
Yes, this is the first time it's applying this to product inside the environment, but we already have the essential training about the software EG integration layer,
Okay.
integration server, and API management.
Okay, that's great. Okay, so this is basically again like how we are going to cover the training. So if you have already gotten the received the formal training from Software AG, so that covers basic and core part, and there are a couple of electives uh, available on API Gateway and Developer Portal both. So basic is just like an overview of the products and all. Core is what we are going to cover in this 5 days. So each and every feature of API Gateway, and we will uh, take a deep dive into all of them. Okay, so basically the agenda I just showed to you, based on that, we are going to cover these topics. So we will learn what is API management and why do we need it. Then we will take a good look at API Gateway, how to create APIs on them, then how to publish APIs on Developer Portal. Along with that, how we can monetize our APIs by creating packages and subscription and publish them to Developer Portal for users to start consuming them. Main focus on securing APIs, how a consumer can use different identifying techniques to call the APIs. And API Gateway comes packed with various policies for mediation and transformation, as well as threat protection. So we will cover each of these policies in detail to see how effective they can be and different use cases where to use them. And very briefly, we will also talk about the deployment scenarios, which is more relevant to threat protection and more relevant to threat protection. So apart from this, there are other topics about API Gateway and Developer Portal administration. So I believe there is another session planned starting from 5th of February, and I'm going to cover this administration or administrative features of API Gateway and Developer Portal in that session, along with integration service administrative features as well. We will have user management. We will discuss user management in details, and we will see different flavors of user management, both in API Gateway and Developer Portal, and how when we bring them together, how user is managed via consumption and application creation, etc. We are going to see them in details. And as I promised, all of these topics will be supported by some demos. So if you have access to if you have API Gateway or Developer Portal installed in your local or have access to any development environment, you can practice these features or just go through these features to learn about them. Okay, so this is basically the agenda. So let's get started. So our first topic for today is an overview of the API management, like the concepts of API management and the platform as a whole. So, of course, the first question that we need to address is what is API management and why do we need it and why it is so important for our business or in this digital era when every organization is moving towards digitization, they're APIfying all their service capabilities they're offering. So in that scenario, how API management is benefiting the organizations and what is the best way possible to achieve that API management? To have an API management and the platform to support it. And then we will learn about the tools that Software AG API management platform provides or the different components to build an API management platform. So what is API? So we all know API stands for Application Programming Interfaces. It is a lightweight means to share the data that an organization has or the business or the core capabilities, the business functionalities can be exposed via these APIs. APIs provide a great mean for information exchange, and that is why it is becoming more and more popular nowadays. So if we look at today's digital world, API is everywhere, not just limited to our web applications, but we are building mobile apps using different APIs. So API is very important, and it enables an organization to connect to a various uh, uh, different applications via APIs. It can bridge the communication between your core applications providing business functionalities to that of your vendors and customers. So API can be used for conducting a simple business operation or for fetching some information or placing some orders. So the usage is like endless. So that's what this slide is talking about, that APIs allow connecting applications or computer systems in a standardized and flexible way. So standardized because by defining APIs, we can tell the consumers or the consumers on how to send the request to get certain information from the backend system. Also, the backend system can follow that same specification when they are returning the response. And flexible way meaning like if the backend cannot be or the consumer cannot conform to the standards or the request or response formats, API can do that bridging in between, can do the transformation or protocol bridging to meet this gap between the consumer and the provider. APIs enable exposing data functionality in web apps, mobile apps, and other connected device. That's exactly what we said, or what I said in the beginning, that by exposing APIs, we can connect everything with everything else. So the usage is endless. APIs provide new models for doing business. So this is interesting, and this basically drives the whole need for having a successful API management and a robust API management platform. So we'll elaborate this topic in a while. The last point is transform the internet into a platform for your business. So basically, these 2 points are connected because we are living in a digital connected world where internet is the most necessary means to communicate with one another. And in this mode, APIs benefit us a lot to set up a new kind of business model. So importance of APIs. Now, there is a common misconception that if we just build the APIs, that is sufficient. And I mean, if we just create APIs, there will be some user of it and they can use it. So that is basically a misconception, and that is like will lead you to definite failure. Why so? So let's take these 2 pictures. On the left, there is these 2 are supposedly pictures of 2 malls, 2 different malls at 2 different countries. So the left side picture talks about shows a mall where the building is ready, the shops, like the facilities are there, the shops are created rather. But there are no other facilities, and there are, of course, it's not packed with crowd. Whereas the picture on the right side shows a jam-packed mall. It's bursting with a crowd. It's looking very popular. So why these 2 pictures? So this is like drawing an analogy to our topic, that whether creating APIs are sufficient to build a successful API management or management platform. So when we take a look at this left-hand side picture, it says that facility is there, but it's not meant for people to come here. So maybe the mall development, the developers have not provided like a backup, power backup, or the escalators for people to move from one floor to the another. So these different facilities are not present, which is why it's not attracting any crowd. So they have built the infrastructure, but haven't given the proper management or facilities for people to start coming and shopping here. Whereas the other picture, it is ready with all facilities. There is a good customer support, good help desk present. The lighting is good. So when you are building APIs, so just keep in mind that building API is not sufficient. You need to think about people who are going to use this API. You need to manage the APIs so that people come attracted towards the APIs and they start consuming them. Also, you need to think from the provider point of view, like the shops here. So you need to give them proper facilities so that they can run their business. So building an API management, a successful API management platform requires to think from both consumer and provider perspective. So when we think of API management or creating API or APIfying our services, So basically what we try to do is create an API economy and create and do a value creation from that. So how do we create this API economy? So there is definitely an API provider who is providing APIs. Now, these APIs can be used by consumers. So consumers can be there are myriad of consumers. So they can be your vendors, they can be customer, and they can also be developers. So app developers who are building some app, for example, a payment gateway app. For banking domains, banks normally exposes APIs for the fintechs or the app developer to create some sort of payment gateway, which require them to use the banking APIs for getting the customer details or getting the bank account details, credit card transactions, etc. So these are the app developers. So they need to consume this APIs. And by consuming this APIs, they are building their apps and they are putting the apps on the Google Play Store or Apple Store. From where normal consumers like you and me are subscribing to those apps. There are in-app purchases available also. So we are somehow paying for the apps, and also there are some free apps available. So the app developer, when they are selling their apps to, or when they are promoting their apps to all these platforms, they are earning some money out of these applications, right? Now, what we can do is now, like API provider can cross-charge the app developer to for letting them use the APIs and can earn some revenue from them. So the new model of doing business that I was talking about in the previous slide is this. So by API management, we can create this API economy, which generates revenue for the organization or for the API provider. So API provider is mostly our organization or your organization who is providing or offering the business capabilities or functionalities over APIs. App developers are consuming these APIs and building their apps and selling them to normal consumers. And then we can think of monetizing. You will hear this term a lot in when we talk about developer portal. So we can monetize, the organization can monetize the APIs, can start charging the app developer for consuming these APIs. And from there, it can earn, this opens up an avenue for generating extra revenue. So this whole value creation can be achieved, this whole value creation can be achieved by building this API management platform, and this API economy can be built on top of that. Another thing is when we build this API economy. So as I said, like when we are building an API management platform or creating an API economy, so we have to think from both consumer and provider point of view. Now, API producer or the provider, so they just create APIs. So this can be the producer here can be a core application in your organization who is capable of doing certain business functionalities. So let's take example of your HR department who is managing an employee's record, the joining and leaving records, the merit review records, etc. Okay, so they are meant for doing all this core functionalities. Now there can be a consumer who can be like another application within your organization willing to use these APIs to fetch some records and process it, and maybe some intranet application wants to use some of these HR functionalities to display some information on the intranet portal, so that when an employee logs in, some information related to his joining date or last review records, etc., will be populated. So we call them as like the API consumer. So they are willing to consume these APIs. Now we need a provider manager, rather a manager who is responsible for taking these APIs and giving it to the consumer in a standardized way. So why this manager is required? So this API manager's role typically involves preparing APIs for consumption, defining API roadmaps, manage the relationship between the consumer and producer, and understand the API usage. So why this manager is required in between? Why cannot API consumer directly talk to the producer and start using their APIs? So let me give you a use case. So let's say API producer is providing, let's say, employee record in a format, in a standard XML format, whereas and they are capable of providing APIs in using web services or SOAP APIs. Okay, whereas the consumer is building a very lightweight mobile app so that the employee can access this information from their mobile or handheld devices. So the consumer's interest is to use a very lightweight API, and they don't need like thousands of records to be fetched in one go. They need probably very key information from the system of records. So obviously, there is a gap between how the API consumer wants to consume the information and how the provider is capable of sharing that information. So in this scenario, the API manager plays an important role to bridge the gaps between the consumer and producer. So API manager can say, okay, don't worry, I can take the API or the information as is from the producer, the way they are exposing it, and I can do some sort of transformation, some trimming down on the messages, and can provide it to the consumer. Also, I can provide the API the way using the protocol or the standards, the way the consumer wants. So API producer need not be worried about doing all these additional functionalities of message conversion or protocol conversion, etc. Let them do their job. I'll cater to the consumer requirement. Another uh, key role or the key requirement from the consumer side may be that they want to use certain sort of or let's say the producer wants to have certain sort of identification mechanism in place for consuming their APIs, which the API consumer cannot follow. So let's say like API producer has used WSS security, or rather WS security, for when exposing their SOAP APIs, whereas API consumer cannot provide those information because they are like trying to build a very lightweight solution. So API, so they can maybe they can just use JWT or OAuth, whereas API producer is requiring WS information along with the authentication. So the manager can also bridge this gap. So they can say like to the consumer, no problem, we can accept JWT or OAuth or any other means of authentication when you call this API. And then when we send the request to the producer, we will do the additional handling to add all this WS security headers, and then prepare the request the way the producer wants. So all this sort of bridging is done by the manager, and that is why we need a very robust management platform in between the producer and the consumer. So when I say manager, think of it as a tool or that is capable of doing all of this out of the box and with a lot of customization options and probably a little bit of additional development. Okay. So this in between provider and manager is what our Software Ages API management platform is all about. So it is a collection of components that can do all of this for the consumer and the provider. And this is how like we can build a successful API economy involving both consumer and producer, keeping their requirements in mind. So when we say like, so before we move on to the next slide, so this is like I talked about the difference in requirements between the consumer and producer and how provider can bridge these gaps. From the previous slide, there is another thing we are saying the provider is exposing their APIs and giving it to the API developer, intending for them to consume the APIs to build their apps. Now the question comes, how app developers are going to be informed about this new APIs. So, I mean, just exposing these APIs is not sufficient. Probably we need some means to inform the app developers or inform the whole world about these APIs to a larger community that these APIs are present. So if you want to use these APIs, this is where you can learn a lot about these APIs individually, can understand what are their functionalities, how they are to be invoked, etc. So, combining these two requirements, publishing or letting the larger developer community or even your vendors and customers know about what is your API offering, and then bridging the different functional and operational gaps between the consumer and API producer, we start building the API platform, API management platform. So the first thing that we try to achieve is create an API gallery. So for that, we take help of developer portal. So Software AG has different, I'm not sure why this slide is coming first, but yeah. So Software Age's API management platform has different components, namely developer portal, API gateway, micro gateway, Engage, and Centrosite. And each of these component has a different role to play in building this API management platform. So let's understand what developer portal can do. So I said as an organization, you are creating tons of APIs and you need a platform to let everyone know that these are your API offerings. Okay. So developer portal plays a key role in that. Using developer portal, just think of it as like an online shopping application where you can browse through different products, can choose what products to buy, can purchase the product. So similarly, on developer portal, we can create an API gallery. Under API gallery, we can publish all, we can publish all the APIs which will be seen under API gallery. So basically creating a catalog. And the APIs, when published, they come with all information like what the API is capable of doing, what are the requests and responses, the error codes, how to call the APIs, etc. So basically a one-stop shop for your consumers to learn more about your API offering. Then along with that, we can create collaboration and communities. So when we publish or create API gallery, you will see this in developer portal when we log into developer portal. After publishing an API, we can have same like your social media posts. So users can give their feedback on the APIs, how the API is performing, or if an user has faced some challenges and found a solution to come the overcome that issue, can share the experience for the other users to follow. So this way we can have like a collaboration and we can create API development community. We can have instant API tryout options. So it's not just, I mean, the consumers or the app developers not just can learn about the API by reading the information given along with, but they can instantly try the API out. Basically, they can test the API to see whether it is returning the results as promised or as described in the API description. So that tryout feature is available. Along with that, as I said, like we can think of monetizing the API. So we can create plans and packages and offer the APIs as like subscriptions to consumer, and thereby start charging the consumers. Like we can say like, okay, these three APIs together you can use. You have to pay like let's say $10 per month, and you can send maximum of 1,000 requests per minute for these three APIs together. So this is like an example of how we create plans, and then we provide the plans to the consumer so that they can start they can subscribe to that plan and then start paying us back or the provider back for using the APIs. And when we create this sort of plans and packages, it becomes really important for us to understand how is the API usage pattern. So for that, we have this reporting and analytics to see how the APIs are performing. So that gives us the opportunity to define KPIs for the APIs, like what to improve for the API, maybe the response time, or maybe the information going back in the response, the error codes or the status code definition, etc. So by looking at this report, and also we can do some trend analysis to see which is the busiest API or which API is most popular amongst the consumers, the usage pattern of both the consumer and the APIs, like during what time the consumer is mostly using this API. So all these of trend analysis, the reporting is possible. Because WebMethods developer portal has a nice analytics dashboard where this information can be seen. And last but not the least, this developer portal can support any type of API, be it a REST API, be it a SOAP API. We can create like different flavors of the same API. Like it can, like a core functionality can be exposed as an API on both SOAP and REST, on using both SOAP and REST protocols. So we can publish both the varieties of the APIs. So we can also publish GraphQL APIs or WebSocket APIs. So there is no limitation on what number or what type of APIs we can publish on the developer portal. So the basic the functionality of developer portal is to create an API gallery for the consumer and give the consumer instant test option. API developer portal has this inbuilt test tool which behaves same way like SOAP UI or Postman if you have used. So it has got that inbuilt tool, and also it tells us like tells us as the to the provider or to the manager how the API is behaving, and we can do some trend analysis on that. The next component is Engage. Honestly, I have not logged into this platform. I just heard about it. So it is like an online portal for your organization to engage, as the name suggests, to engage the app developers maybe run some API hackathons or using the other components. So basically to run these sort of API hackathon programs and all, Engage can be used, but really I do not know how this works, or I have never logged in. So if you ask me to show, I cannot. So that's all about Engage. Um, these are some, yeah, so some features of Engage. The key tool in this whole API management platform is API Gateway. So take it as like the heart and soul of the API management, brain, heart, and soul of the whole API management platform. Because this is the single tool where you can create, manage APIs, can create and manage consumers, can define different policies to evaluate the threats uh, by using threat management policies for identification, policies for mediation and transformation, plus the analytics, and it can control all other tools. So this is the most important thing, and of course our focus definitely will be on this tool. So as I said, like the key features of API Gateway is to do API management. And again, it has, we can use different types of APIs, like based on their protocols. There is absolutely no limit on how many APIs we can create or what type of APIs. Basically, whatever is supported or available in the all the industry standard APIs can be created and managed via this tool. We can use different policies to do protect API security, on mediation, transformation, routing, etc. We can do monitoring and SLA management monitoring also using these policies. We can do API governance. So basically, we can define how to move these APIs. We can, like, this tool has some inbuilt version controlling. So we can define API versions. We can also assign some tags to the APIs to say whether this is like this API is in beta phase, or it is ready for production, or it is just being developed, or just like a trial version of it. So we can do all of that. And then it has got its inbuilt CI/CD capabilities. So I'm sure you have seen some CI/CD capabilities of web methods uh, integration platforms, basically AV and deployer. So if you are not developing a fully functional CI/CD pipeline using AV developer, AV deployer, and Jenkins, you can still use API Gateway's own CI/CD to manage and promote the APIs from one version to from one environment to the another. We will talk about it mostly during our administration session. I'll see if we can cover this topic briefly in within this 5 days. API Gateway also has its own dashboard, which gives like detail description of the API consumption. And if some API is failing, we can read why the API has failed, what is the error. We can optionally store the request and response bodies to see what has come, what has gone to the native or the backend system. So we can do debugging of APIs also to see how different policies got evaluated. So basically this dashboard, and there is another feature called Tracer. So combining these two, we can do a complete API consumption analysis and identify the errors and bugs. And again, we can identify the KPIs to improve upon. Maybe like policies, there are policies to do API performance monitoring. So and that data is the data can be captured in the dashboards or in the analytics. And by reading or doing some trend analysis from that data, we can understand which are the slow performing APIs or which APIs are mostly violating the SLA, the specified SLAs, etc. And from there on, we can improve the API performance or take a look at what we can do to make it a better performing API. And also this API gateway supports hybrid integration. So both ways it is possible. So there are implementations where API gateway is on the cloud, and the integration platform is on the integration platform is on premise. So cloud, again, it can be like customers' own private cloud or software AG provided cloud. So, so this kind of hybrid architecture is possible. Also, the API gateway is available on WM. So not just on SaaS, but we can have or we can use WM iPaaS, which is WM.io. So API gateway, what you are seeing here, this exact screen or this exact application is available on WM.io API gateway. So there are implementations where customer choose the iPaaS of API gateway and their whole integration platform is on-prem. So the platform supports that kind of hybrid integration also. So there are different possibilities of achieving an hybrid integration. So this slide probably talks very less about the whole of API Gateway's capabilities, just the 6 broad or major points, but there's a lot to explore on or in API Gateway. The fourth component of this platform is Centrosite. So a brief history about Centrosite is earlier, like when we did not have this API gateway, we used to have something called Mediator. So Centrosite and Mediator together used to be like the policy definition and enforcement point. So Centrosite in old days used to do both design time and runtime governance. By that, what does that mean? So design time governance is like you can set some standards, and when you are creating a service or an API, you must follow those standards for defining your services or APIs. For example, you are defining certain naming convention for your services or APIs. So a developer must abide to those naming conventions. And when you are creating the services and APIs, you can also define some life cycle to say like how the whole of the SDLC of the service or API will be managed or governed. So basically, like starting from the requirement phase to the development phase, testing phase, and then to production. So which service at which stage can be monitored or tracked by defining different life cycles in Centrosite, and that that provides the development governance of the services and APIs. Using this way, I mean, using all this life cycle, etc., we can also create service catalog or API catalog to see which version of the service is, let's say, in production and how many consumers are there. So so that if tomorrow we have to decommission that service, we can easily identify which are going to be the impacted consumers, or same for the APIs. So these were all the design and development time governance that Centrosite can do. Previously, Centrosite also used to do all the runtime governance of the services and APIs, meaning the policies that you will see, like we are creating in API Gateway. Earlier, we used to create them in Centrosite and apply them. So we could design the policies, for example, how an API or a service will be authenticated, or rather how a consumer calling a service or API will be authenticated. So that is a policy, and that policy can be or could be designed in Centrasite and then implemented. So at runtime, that policy is like executed or evaluated. Then like if the policy evaluation is successful, the consumer will invoke the service. So together Centrasite. So Centrasite used to be the design, like the tool for designing or implementing these policies, called Policy Enforcement Point or PEP. And Mediator at runtime used to execute all these policies. So together they used to do this functionality. Now, after API Gateway evolved, the runtime governance policies were slowly shifted to API Gateway. So now Centrasite's role is purely for doing a development or design time governance. So basically like create the service catalog, have some approval in place, define the life cycle of the service development, etc. You can access the services or APIs to see again how like the underlying WSD or the Swagger definition. But having said that, if you are using developer portal, already your API information is there. So again, Centrasite role can be further reduced to do service level governance. So organizations who are very interested in doing SOA governance, or they want to establish certain standard procedure for developing services and APIs, can use Centrasite or can adopt Centrasite to define those design time governance policies, and also can define different roles, like enterprise architect has to approve a service for development, then it will go to the development phase. Once it is developed, then it will be sent to the release manager for releasing it to the QA environment. Once QA is complete, the service has to be signed by the release manager for production deployment, etc. So this whole SDLC flow can be governed, defined and governed by the Centrasite, as well as some certain standard like the naming convention, the version, what will be the major and minor version of the service, etc. So for all of this, and especially for SOA governance and for creating service catalog, Centrasite is the tool to use. Okay, and then so this is all like registry and repository of the service, the lifecycle management and governance of API management. Last but not least, we have the other component called the micro gateway. So micro gateway is nothing but API gateway, but it has very less resource consumption compared to your normal API gateway. So why do we need micro gateway? So in architectures where like we are deploying containers or MSRs, there we go for mainly for SOA and microservice-based architecture. We normally deploy, not normally, there are scenarios where customer wants to deploy their services on containers, so that the containers can be scaled up or down based on the incoming request or volume of the transactions. So in this scenario where your microservices are running in different containers, there can be requirement for one microservice to communicate to the other microservice. Okay, so traditional way of doing this communication is this microservice is like this microservice like the API for this microservice has been created on the API gateway. This microservice is also present as an API on the API gateway. So if this first microservice has to call the second microservice by calling its API, then it will connect to this API gateway, the central API gateway, and then call the second microservice API. So this sort of communication, from bottom to the up, is called north-south communication. So now it's just like this. How do I? So the traditional communication is like this, okay? Something like this. So it has to go to this central API gateway and then call the other service. So this is called north-south communication. And this one is definitely going to be little resource intensive because this call happens over the network and takes too many hops to reach to the next service, next API invocation. Okay. So instead of doing this is fine. I mean, technically it is fine and achievable. It will yield you the same result. But if you want to reduce the resource utilization or reduce the network footprints, then what you can do is you can deploy micro gateway in the container along with your microservice. For each of the microservice containers, there will be micro gateways. And instead of going to the central one, each micro gateway will talk to the other micro gateway. So communication will be sideways. So this can directly communicate to this one. So this is called sideways communication or east-west communication, and this definitely is faster because it doesn't have to go through all the way long to the central API gateway. It can because central API gateway is also catering to your consumers. So the API, the policies. Uh, I mean, implemented for that API can be like consumer specific. When one microservice is calling the other microservice via API, we may not need to run all those policies, or there can be just one simple identification or authentication mechanism for doing that. So it simplifies the whole API invocation. So for this east-west communication, we can adopt micro gateway. And we can still have our central API gateway through which the consumers will call the microservices. So they can call the microservice A via like this line from consumer application to the central to the microservice A. But when microservice A has to call microservice B or the second one, it can use the micro gateway to achieve that communication. And this central API gateway will have a list of micro gateways that are configured here and can manage all those micro gateways. So this is like a simpler or lightweight version of API gateway, which is very useful in microservice or container-based architecture. So with that, we come to a conclusion or come to an end of the components that Software AG's API management platform offers. So along with this component support, so API management platform can also define or do an end-to-end support for the APIs. So it can define the roadmap for the API journey. So starting from the API definition, identify the resources, like which are the right candidates for API for apification. Then design the APIs and publish the APIs on gateways, and from there prototype and mocking, and then try the APIs. And from APIs, we can do once we have the API definition, we can do the backend development of the native service, how it should receive the request and how it should respond. It can support automated CI/CD. So like I said, API Gateway has its own promotion management, which is like inbuilt CI/CD. or we can take help of ABA and deployer and Jenkins pipeline to deploy APIs from one environment to the other. Then we can have different governance policies, runtime governance policies for API invocation as well as threat management. And finally, we can do API performance. We can analyze, we can do trend analysis on API consumption and usage. So API management platform does this complete end-to-end support for the API, starting from its inception to its final ready state, and also like a continuous improvement on monitor the API performance and do continuous improvement on the APIs. Okay. So to summarize, API management platform of web methods in cloud or on-premise or in hybrid architecture can use these 5 components: developer portal, Engage, API gateway, micro gateway, and center side. Our focus will be on API gateway. I'm reiterating, and then we will move on to the developer portal. Now, having said that, like all these 5 components are there. So when we start building API platform, API management platform for a customer, we definitely have to use API gateway because that is the single most platform to create and manage all APIs and consumers, etc. Now, rest of the tools are optional and often driven by your focus of the project. So there are customers, especially like banking or insurance sector customers, who wants to create API marketplace. So like a common platform where can APIs from different providers, or rather, for example, for insurance companies, like insurance, different providers can publish their insurance policies for consumers to do an analysis and identify or choose which policy is suitable for them. So if they are intending to build this sort of marketplace, then they can take help of developer portal. And also, like if they want to engage the app developers, mainly for banking sector customers, they invite fintechs or the app developers to develop different payment gateways, etc., who definitely need to use the banking APIs. So for them, apart from API gateway, developer portal become very useful and like must-have tool. Similarly, like a customer who is mainly focusing on building API management platform, but their services and APIs are all running in container, they might get interested in adopting micro gateway to improve the performance of the whole microservice architecture. Similarly, like a customer, after building API gateway and API management platform using both developer portal and API gateway, can be interested in running a separate SOA governance project. So they can choose Centrasite for doing that, for implementing that. So out of these 5 tools, API gateway has to be used, but other tools are like based on the requirement of the project, customer may not want to use that. I'm not sure, apart from API gateway, if you are using any of these other tools like developer portal or micro gateway or Centrasite. So if you are using, then yeah, of course, you will get to know about them. But for you, API gateway has to be there, and you need to learn a lot about API gateway. So that is why the other tools are not highlighted here. So that brings us to the end of the first topic. Sorry, this was all theory and nothing practical. I did not mention about taking a break. So if you want to take a break, a quick break, I'm okay with that. If you want to continue to the next session, I'm okay that way also. So let me know if you want to take a quick break or just move on to the next
No,
topic.
you can move the next topic. We need maybe in the half of the time we can take a break. But according to the component inside MOE, actually we have the all component. Maybe I don't know about this the this
Engage.
engage. Yes, maybe
Yeah,
I
even
don't
I do
know.
not know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but others we already have this all component inside MOE. So maybe we need to get information about each component. Maybe I don't know, maybe center site, it is not part of the API management. It is in most for the it's our governance. And
Yes.
it should be also applied inside MOE. Maybe Nitrogen, we still not touch this point until now. But if there anything a bit related to the API management and the center side, you can on any setting configuration enforcement, you can mention also in this training.
Okay, so I also have not kept Central Site in my training agenda because mostly I do API Gateway and Developer Portal training. So let me see if I can fit that into the agenda. Maybe on day 4 or on the last day, I'll probably give a quick demo of Central Site. So not before that. Let me first cover
We don't
all.
need to cover center side. Actually, we need just only the connection between the center side and how you can apply or how center side enforce policy to the API gateway or reverse.
Okay,
Okay.
so we don't do that actually. So as I said, Central Site doesn't do API runtime policy enforcement. It is only for development cycle. So I'll show you how to do that also. So maybe on the 4th or on the last day, we will just I'll open Central Site and just quickly explain you how to do that. Okay,
Okay, thank you.
no problem. Okay, so we learned a thing or two about the API management platform and the different components of it. So let's now start with API Gateway. So from here on, I will be using the API Gateway, uh, the actual tool. Okay. So our next topic is on API Gateway. So we'll have an overview of what API Gateway is and what are the capabilities of API Gateway, what we can do, how to log in, and we'll also see how to do user management in API Gateway and why do we need user management in API Gateway. So as I said, when I was explaining API management platform, that API gateway is probably the key component of this whole management platform because using this API gateway, we can define APIs, we can define API lifecycle, we can manage the APIs, meaning whether or not API is activated, how to use the API, then can define consumers via applications, if we are monetizing the API, we can define the plans and packages for the API or a set of APIs. And also we can control the other tools like developer portal. We can have connections created to developer portal so that we can publish APIs from gateway to the portal. At the same time, we can control for example, how the logging functionality of developer portal will be, like what events we will capture and display on the on the analytics dashboard. So we can also define threat management policies. So before even API can be invoked, the threat management policies will be executed to see whether the request has come from a valid source, a valid IP or not. So there are different policies. We are going to cover all of them briefly on day 3, most probably. So this is why API gateway is needed. So the same thing, API gateway can do all this runtime policy enforcement. We can manage and define and manage the APIs via this web UI. This is like a very user-friendly web UI and very sophisticated, I would say. And we can do different runtime policy enforcements. We can define applications for consumer identifications using various standard ways of using API key, OAuth 2 tokens, JWT token, or WSS security, WSS username tokens, or maybe basic authentication as well. Okay. And of course, developer portal integration to publish the API, to create the API gallery, and also publish plans and packages. So let's take a look at the API gateway. So API gateway, So API Gateway UI or the web UI is accessed using this standard port call 9072, either HTTP 9072 or HTTPS 9073. So server name and the port number. At time of installation, we can change this port number to a port that we want to use. So API Gateway, very briefly about the API Gateway architecture. API Gateway is basically a packaged application or running on an integration server. So if I open the integration server, which is like the backbone of this API Gateway, you will find it like a normal integration server like this. And on this integration server, we have this API Gateway package installed. Okay, so it has like, as I said, it's a packaged application. So all the UIs and everything, the code is inside this package. And there are several other configuration files. So we'll see if we can cover some of them during our admin session. So in order to access this API Gateway web UI, we can either directly type the server host and port in the browser, web browser, or we can also come to this integration server if we have proper access and privilege to call or open this integration server. From here, we can go to the solution tabs and can open API Gateway. So both will it will also redirect the request to this web UI, and we can log in from here. So this web UI is the interface for API provider as well as API gateway administrator to manage APIs and manage other configurations, etc. So basically everything related to API, like configuration, policy configuration, etc. Everything is done from the API, from this web UI. So I have logged in as an administrator. So I have like a full. So what we are seeing, like this is the view of an admin user. So basically administrator is a super user. So all features and functionalities are available to the are seen or available when we are logging in as an administrator. So mostly we will be focusing on these parts. So how to create APIs. So if we click on this APIs tab, we will see like a list of APIs defined. However, I have just one API created here. So we can view a complete list of the APIs. We can also do search or filter the APIs. So like I want to see which are my active APIs, or I want to see if there are any micro gateways configured, and based on the micro gateway endpoints, we can filter the APIs. Now, when we say management of APIs, so management or managing APIs, definitely the first thing is to create the APIs. So we can create the APIs here. After that, we can activate or deactivate the API from this screen by moving this slider to the left or right. We can see analytics of the API. We can publish the API to developer portal if a developer portal is already connected or configured with this API gateway. We can unpublish the previously published APIs from developer portal. We can also delete the API. We can export the API. So export is another option of moving or deploying the API to the next environment. If we do not have API staging and promotion management configured, or if we do not have Jenkins or fully fledged, fully functional CI/CD pipelines available, then we can use this export mechanism to export the API definition and then import it to the next environment. So all of these are possible. Now, so next is like policies. So from policies, we can configure the threat protection policies. We can also configure some global policies. Global policies are like, as the name suggests, it will be applicable to all APIs. Of course, there are certain criteria we can specify for applying the policies, but in general, global policies are applied mostly to all APIs. And we can also define some policy templates. So when I covered the policies, I'll cover this policy template. Then the next tab is for application. Right now, there is no application configured here, but applications are created or they're, I call it like an interface for the consumer. So we can identify a consumer by creating application for them. So we can define various identification methods for the consumer. More than one identification methods are possible for a consumer to use. For example, HTTP basic auth or WSS user token or JWT. So a consumer can provide any of these, one of these authentication methods when calling the APIs. Also, we can define the consumer to API relationship. So basically, we can create the application and map certain APIs to it. So that defines like the authorization of the consumer to invoke the APIs. So the consumer can only invoke those APIs. Anything outside that will not be allowed, or consumer cannot invoke the APIs that are not mapped to the applications. We will learn more about applications and what is a registered application, what is a global application, etc. Maybe today or definitely tomorrow. Then we can define plans and packages. So as I said, plans are like defining, it's just your, I'm pretty sure you all are having some OTT platform subscription. So which says like, for monthly this much amount, let's say $15 a month, you can access the OTT on 3 devices simultaneously, and you can have HD resolution for the videos, etc. So similarly, we can define plans like a gold plan will include 3 APIs which can be consumed like 1,000 requests per minute, etc. So we can define plans here and can convert them into packages and publish them on the portal. Once the package is consumed or subscribed by an application or a user, we can see the subscription details here. And then like we can do analysis if the application is breaching its subscription plan, the quota we say, like if they have been given a quota of sending 1,000 requests per minute for all 3 APIs, whether or not they are breaching the quota and how often they're breaching them. And based on that, we can do run metering and can cross-charge them. So all will be covered later. Micro gateways, as I said, like if we have microservice-based architectures, we can adopt micro gateway and can configure all the micro gateway for monitoring purposes. Then App Mesh is an advanced feature. It is basically like if we have simultaneous or sequential API calls, instead of consumer calling the APIs one by one, we can give them one API. And internally, we can call the APIs sequentially and map or club all the responses together and send a response back to the consumer. So App Mesh is for that. Okay, so these are like the different features API Gateway offers. Along with that, since I have logged in as an administrator, we have additional.
Can I ask you about something before moving to the next part about the App Mesh?
Yes. Yes.
So, on what it is depend to appearing this part inside the developer port, as we don't have this inside the current installation, it is a part of the license.
I think so. Yes.
So, can you provide more detail for the use for the App Mesh, because maybe it is why we are need to use this App Mesh inside the and provided service. And what is the need from the business or from the development to apply the App Mesh inside the environment?
Okay, so as I said, like at a high level, App Mesh is used for like let's say you have to call 3 APIs in sequence. So basically, consumer is sending one request. So how to say this? Okay, so let's say consumer is sending an employee ID or your app. Consumer is sending an employee ID. So based on the employee ID, you are going to the first backend application to fetch some employee's personal details. Then going to the next system of records where you are, or going to the payroll system to fetch the employee's current payroll and payroll history. And then using the third, using the same employee ID, you are going to the what you call the maybe you are fetching some insurance benefits, etc. information for the employees. Now, if consumer wants to have all this information clubbed together, so there are 2 ways of doing it traditionally. One is let the consumer call all these 3 services or the APIs by themselves using employee ID and get the information back from each of this API and let the consumer club all the responses together. So that is one option. The second option is instead of you create a wrapper service which is exposed as an API to your consumer. So that consumer calls that wrapper service using employee ID as the key in the request. And based on this, your wrapper service is calling all these 3 services. So the HR information, the payroll information, and then the tax and other benefit information. And then this wrapper service is combining all these responses, making it one big response and giving it back to the consumer. Okay, so these
this
are
is like composing composing a service from different sources to the in single resource. So you are considering there is no integration server or there is no flow services in the behind of the gateway.
No, flow service is definitely there. So all I'm saying, like instead of consumer making 3 different API call, or you make creating a wrapper service to call these 3 APIs separately and then combining all the responses, we can define app mesh. We can define this whole sequence to say like service A will be called first, then service B, service C. Backend services are still there. So like combining the
Yeah.
response will be handled by the API gateway.
Okay, so combining of these 3 results, it will be also have a set of transformation about the results. Yeah, like it
Uh,
is.
it depends on the how you when you say transformation, so I would expect that the APIs are returning the responses in its original, the way the responses should be. Using AppMesh, we are just combining the responses, nothing more. I'm not too sure if we can separately do another set of transformation. I believe not. So I got your point. So you are saying like if HR system is returning a response, we have to do certain sort of transformation, etc. So that
Yes.
transformation has to be catered by the flow service that is actually fetching the information from HR application, or using the API policy, transformation policy, to do some sort of apply some
Yes,
transformation
maybe.
logic.
Yes, maybe
But
we can pick up subset of the data. Maybe we are not returning all of the data from the back-end services.
yeah, so that has to be handled by the API itself. So AppMesh will just create like do the sequential calling and just combine the result. But
It
individual
is
API responses will not be, the transformation will not
the
be handled by
the
AppMesh.
call by app mesh. It will be in the sequential, but in the parallel.
Sequential.
It's sequential. So okay. So it can be done
I
through the integration service server.
Yeah, of course it can be done through integration server. Probably I have not given you a good example. Another example I can think of is maybe combining, for example, your actual API requires um, um, is exposed, or we have enforced OAuth 2 based authentication. Now the consumer has to call another API to first fetch the OAuth token. So instead of consumer making 2 calls, 2 different calls to fetch the OAuth token and then call the actual API using the token, we can create an app mesh so that they can make just single call. The token is fetched for them and the same token is passed to the next API for authentication, something like that. Maybe I have not given you a proper example, but all I'm trying to say is this is just for making sequential call and combining the result, or the result of the first API can be passed to the second API if required. It can definitely be handled by your flow service or integration server, or it can be left to the consumer to manage all different calls. But AppMesh can alternately be used. Did I answer your question or give some explanation, or you have more further doubts?
Yes, it is. It sounds like yes, it is used to compose, but as based on my formation from the essential course, it is related to it. Yani, app mesh and the microservices is tied together. If you need to get benefit from microservices, you should apply the service mesh according to this microservices.
Yes.
But
So this service call, as I said, like in microservices, like there can be a need for calling from one microservice to another, to the next, etc. So all these together can be combined. And you are not seeing probably in your environment, because I have also applied micro gateway license in my installation. So that is why both micro gateway and AppMesh is appearing here. In your installation, probably only API Gateway has been installed and API Gateway license, the advanced edition license has been applied.
Yes, we have this micro gateway also, as we already have MSR
Okay.
in week. But there is no app mesh, so I just requested. Okay, no problem. So we can.
I will try to fetch more information, and if possible, I'll try create a quick demo for you. Maybe on after we finish the other topics, I'll try to do a quick demo for you on
Thank you.
AppMesh.
Thank
Okay.
you very much. Thank you.
No problem. So I was on this topic of administration. So as I said, like after logging into the gateway, an administrator can also do certain administrative uh, functions. So basically, so from this user drop-down administrator, we can land into this screen where we can do some general configurations for the API gateway. For example, extended settings. So as I said, this is API Gateway is running on integration servers. So as you all know, integration server has some extended settings parameters. So those parameters can be controlled from here, plus some additional extended settings parameters required by API or required by API Gateway for carrying out its own operations. So those can also be managed from here. This is just an example of what administrative functionalities are. We can do license management. We can also set up clusters. We can configure JNDI JMS if there is a need for sending SOAP over JMS or REST over JMS, etc. Similarly, from the security tab, we can, or an administrator can configure the key store trust store for the API gateway. This key store trust store can be used to do SSL-based communication with consumers as well as to the backend, and also for signing and encryption of both, I mean, signing, verification, encryption, and decryption of both incoming and outgoing messages. We can also do JWT or OAuth-based configuration. The configurations to support JWT or OAuth token validation. Destination, here we can configure like the what event types will be captured and where the what audit log information or what information will be captured as audit log, etc. For API gateway as well as API developer portal, Centrosite, if we have email server configured for sending alerts on policy violation, we can configure email server here, etc., and can use that server to trigger alert emails. So all these configurations are possible. Similarly, we have managed data facility to basically archive and purge the audit API gateways event data. So remember, this feature is just for deleting or archiving the event data, the actual API gateway data, which is like the APIs, information of APIs or applications, etc. To purge them or to archive them, there are back scripts available at the server level. So we need to use them to create periodic backup of API gateway and Elasticsearch, and those backups can be used for restoring API gateway, etc. So the options you are seeing here is just for archiving and purging the event data, or if you want to restore them, historic data can be restored from the old archives. System settings, some more configurations, and external accounts, some more configurations to configure integration servers, service mesh, etc., service registry, etc. So these are all administrative features available. Apart from this, there are other features available on Gateway. For example, aliases. Yes.
About the external accounts.
Yes.
Yes, this is related to what? يعني service registry. Actually, I don't understand what it is.
Service registry is like for creating your service catalog. There are external service registry available, for example, Eureka or Service Console default. So we can publish service metadata to those registries, and then can create. So if we are not using Centrosite, but if we have a third party service registry tool, then we can configure those tools here in API Gateway and can publish the metadata of the service into those tools. So honestly, I have not seen anyone using them, so I'm not sure if um, these are practically used. These are like couple of demo or dummy registry accounts created, but I'm not quite sure if I have seen customers using them.
So does that mean something like this is if I'm using this Postman collection or repo, public repo, I can register for the service from here, so I can publish my applications to this public repo, or what is the repository you mean here? Actually, I
I
didn't
think,
see this Erika and this service console.
yeah, even I have not seen, but I think what you are saying is quite correct. So if you want to create that kind of service repository or registry, you can configure those third-party applications here. So basically for service discovery.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, AWS, I think there is some custom policy configurations where we can trigger AWS Lambda workflow. So we can configure AWS here to trigger those AWS Lambda workflows. Integration servers. So sometimes, or rather, it is possible that in API-led integrations, we get the API definition either in form of WSDL or Swagger, and from there we create the APIs on gateways. Now, to create the flow service, we can configure an integration server and can publish the API back to the integration server. Normally, what we do is we create the uh, WSD or a REST resource on the integration server and take the Swagger or WSDL and configure the API here. But in some cases, if we have the API available with us, we can publish the API back to the integration server to create like a package structure and all. So it is possible, but the only problem is when we are doing some sort of development, I'm pretty sure MOE also follows this convention. We tend to define our packages and the content of the package, like the folder structure, the service name, following certain conventions. So we have some standards defined. So when we publish something, some API back from API gateway to integration server, it creates the folder structure or it creates the package and all, but it is not as per our standards, and so we cannot control the naming convention, etc. So I mean, I really do not know what is the benefit of publishing something back to the integration server if we cannot reuse it. Probably it just gives us the hint of how the WSD is looking like or how the REST resource services are looking like, but that's all. It it's please, I mean, what I am trying to say is don't take it as like I create the API and if I publish it back to the integration server, all the flow services, the package, the folder structure, everything will be automatically created. It gets created, but it does not conform to the standards that we have defined for our development environment. So yeah, we can try this out, but may not be very useful. Okay. Okay, so coming back to this, so we can, from the other features, as I said, like we can use promotion management to define stages for promoting APIs from dev to QA, for example, then from QA to production, etc. So we can define stages here, and then from promotion, we can identify which APIs or which other assets we want to deploy and can deploy them. And similarly, we can roll back from the target environment. So promotion management is used for deployment of APIs. We have something called aliases. I will explain it in details when we talk about the.
I'm sorry
Yes.
for a lot of interruptions, but can
No,
we
no
back to this
worries.
promotion activity?
Yes.
Yes.
Nothing is configured, so I
Yes,
cannot
the promotion you are talking about this is that if we are providing the API in the same API or the same portal, right? Or
Can you please come again?
again, now we have a three environment in MWE, staging, development, staging, and production. Okay. And this is the environment, and they are already separated. Each one, it has its own development, network, and packaging and license. Okay.
Okay.
So how we can move or get advances from this configuration related to the stage? Are you moving from physical environment to another environment, or maybe you can provide two type of API, maybe one demo and the other testing and the other for production in the same environment, and all of them is production actually in the same environment.
No. Okay. I think I got your question. Let me explain and then you can correct me if I explained it correctly or not. So let's say this is the API and API gateway environment in my local where I'm doing all the API developments. Okay. Now I need to move this API, basically deploy this API to an SIT or a QA environment, where this API will be tested. Under SIT system integration testing, this API will be tested. So in order to deploy, so basically the deployment of API. So in order to deploy whatever API I have created in my local environment, I can use this promotion management to define, let's say, QA environment. I do not have any actually. So let me just create some dummy. Let's say my next environment is QA, and it is running on localhost 6666, and post password is not necessary, and save it. Okay. So I can define the target environments, like QA is one target environment, UAT can be another target environment, etc. So after defining these environments under stages option, I go to promotion, and then I define like what API I want to promote or deploy. So let's select APIs, and it says like Hello World API is available. So I select this Hello World API and click on next. So this becomes a deployment candidate for my promotion. Now, if I click on next, it says, what is your next target environment where I want to deploy this API? So I can select QA, or if I want to deploy it to QA, or to UAT or production, if I have multiple environment stages configured, I can select all of them together and can click on next. And let's say I give a name of this promotion and say promote. So this promote option, what it will do is it will connect to the QA API gateway and create the API over there. So deploy the API over there. So API created with all policies, the related applications, everything can be deployed to the QA environment as is, and then it can be tested over there. Similarly, if after finishing QA, if I want to deploy the tested APIs from QA environment to production, I can define in QA API gateway, I can define production as the next stage and can select what APIs and assets to be deployed and can deploy to the production environment. So this way I can develop APIs in one environment, deploy it to the next environment for testing. And once testing is over, I can deploy it to the production environment for actual usage. So did I explain your okay?
Yes, I get the point. Like the WMP deployer in integration server, you
Exactly,
can move
exactly.
the packages from environment to environment.
Exactly.
Okay.
So in API gateway case, so if we want to deploy APIs, so there is like we can always use ABN deployer. If you are familiar with WM deployer, you know already that WM deployer supports both runtime and repository based deployment. So in repository based deployment, we take the assets from a version control system, then create a build using ABE scripts, and then use that build to using that build deployer deploys the components to the next target environment. So if we want to, we can use ABE and deployer for API deployment also. So we can take the APIs, deposit them in a version control system, run Jenkins pipeline to extract these assets, run ABE scripts on them to create build, and then use deployer to take the build and deploy it to the next environment. If we do not have that fully functional CI/CD pipeline available with us, then this promotion management can help you to do this kind of deployment. Okay.
Okay.
There is also another very rudimentary option available, which is like take an export of this API, including all the other related asset, and simply use this feature called import on the target side and use this. So when you export, it will create just a zip file of the APIs, the information and definition in plain simple JSON files, and then you can import the whole of the zip file into the next environment. So the third option, if you have nothing configured, then take help of this export and import option. Okay. And analytics, yeah. So this is the analytics screen of API Gateway last 24 hours. So this sort of pie charts you can see from here, which says which API got invoked and what is the response time of each of this API, which consumer application called the API, etc. Also, we can see application-based analytics data per application. So when we click on analytics from this option, it gives the analytics view of all the APIs on this gateway or all applications on this gateway. So there is another option of viewing the analytics, which is from the API itself. So if we click on any API and click on this analytics tab, it will give the analytics information of this particular API, not other APIs. So we can see like this API was invoked 8 times, once it failed, then which application consumed this API, etc. So API specific analytics data can be viewed from the particular API after opening the API. If we want to view the overall analytics of gateway, then we can use this option of doing the or click analytics from here and see the analytics of API gateway, the whole of it. Okay. The next important feature of API gateway administrator is to do user management. Now, user management is so first of all, to do user management, one has to have admin privileges and has to log into the web UI as an administrator or admin like user. Okay. Now, why do we need user management? So, for two reasons, we need user management to be done in API gateway. One is if we want to restrict the access of this web UI to within my own team, within the development team as a whole. So within the development team, not everyone needs a full or all privileges to access API gateway. Most of the teammates are responsible for API development. Hence, we can restrict their access from changing the API gateway configurations. So we can restrict them from changing any of the extended settings or any of the OAuth or JWT settings, etc. So we can apply this user management to control how my teammates are going to use API gateway. The second reason why we do user management is if we have consumers enabled on basic auth, so they are sending user ID password over or in HTTP transport layer when calling the API. So those users we can configure here and can tag them to the application. So at runtime, when certain API is invoked, API gateway identifies the related applications and from there identifies what user is configured. And finally, it does the user validation. So for these two reasons, if we can, or we normally do user management in API gateway. The third, which is not that important, is if we want to publish our APIs to developer portal, we have to have a communication between API gateway and developer portal. So we have to create certain user IDs to connect to developer portal and vice versa. So for that purpose, I have already created portal user. I will show you when we talk about publishing APIs from gateway to the portal, how this user is used. So as you can see, I have only administrator user available. So in API gateway, each user is tagged to one or more groups. So when a user is created in API gateway, let me create one user. This user we will use later for API invocation. So let me create this user, API user 1. Password is 123. So we can create a user like this in API, let's say API user. So by default, every user that we create on gateway is linked to this everybody group. So if I draw an analogy or parallel to our integration server, like all users are part of everybody user group, same thing here. The moment our user is created, it gets tagged to everybody group. Now, everybody group just provide basic privileges to the user. Basically, only the login is allowed, but nothing more than that. So to assign privileges, so that is done by defining groups and teams. Okay. So what privilege I can assign to the user or to a set of users. So after creating groups, after creating users, we can tag users to one or more groups. So the groups you are seeing here are the predefined groups. So administrator, API gateway administrators, and API gateway providers. So administrators, like any user getting tagged to this group, meaning they have full privileges, full functional privileges over API gateway, because these groups are internally tagged to teams called administrator and administrators team. What is teams? I'll just explain in a bit. So we can define our own group here. So similar to, provider is like user group having less privileges than the administrator. Basically, any user added to this group is capable of just create APIs and create policies and applications, etc. So if you want to restrict your team members' access to this API gateway web UI, you can map all of them to the providers group. They will be able to create, manage APIs, applications, policies, etc., but they won't be able to change any other administrative settings or configurations or even global policies. So this way we can restrict the usage. So let's say I'm creating a custom group called API Gateway Consumers. So my intention is to map all the users which will be used for API invocation to this group. This group, I'm not going to assign any functional privileges. So meaning when a user logs in to API Gateway Web UI using that particular user ID, or any user being part of the consumers group, will not be able to do any functionality at all on the gateway, will just be able to call the API gateway. Will show you how the login view changes. Okay. Then finally, we have something called Teams. So Teams is actually the interface where we can define the privileges, like within Teams configuration, we can define these are different functional privileges. So we can define what functional privileges I want to assign to a group or and then in turn to the users map to that group. So I can define, like, again, like these are the predefined teams. So administrator team, you will see like everything is ticked, meaning any member or any user tagged to or any user group tagged to administrators team has full functional privileges to API gateway. Whereas if I open API gateway provider teams, only handful of features are selected, meaning they can or the users tag to or user group tag to this particular team can only manage APIs, activate, deactivate APIs, can configure policies, etc., can import, export assets, but as you can see, cannot manage global policies, cannot manage threat protection policies, etc. So if you want to define your custom team, you can do so by adding, let's say, API gateway. And I can select like manage API, manage global policies, manage aliases, everything. So anything related to API, I want, anything related to API management and policy management, I want all team members to be able to do that. So I can click on all these features and save it as a team, and can tag a particular user group to this team. So let's say this is not final, but just for demo. So let's say I want to map the API consumer group to this team. Now let's log in back to API Gateway. password is 1, 2, 3. So now I will be able to see all these things, like I can create APIs, I can create policies, can manage also global policies, threat protection. I can create global policies, etc. But I cannot see any of the administration. So that whole administration task feature is missing from this drop down. So this way I can control what a user can do on this API gateway web UI. Let me log in back as administrator and let's talk some more about this user management feature. So this is
Type.
one way.
What about the other ACL? Like if you are connecting to the integration server, you will see other groups. And I see only here the administrator group only and everyone
Hmm.
or the default. And still other groups inside the integration server like the developers, the monitor users, monitor administrators. It is appearing
Okay.
inside the integration server itself.
Yeah, it will
Is there
be
any relation
still
between the
no.
two of them? Because if I create a new group inside the API portal, if you go to the integration server, you will find the group.
Yes, yes. So as I said, like API Gateway's backbone is integration server. So if you are seeing any users and groups there, those are like by default. And it depends if you have. Uh, I'm still not so familiar with this new. Where is this? Security.
Security, yes.
Yes, yes. So you will still find the groups called replicators, developers, etc. We do not see them on the API Gateway web UI because these are kept hidden from these are very particular to integration server. This is nothing to do with API Gateway. We still need these users and ACLs. For example, if we want to do some kind of development for custom policy extension or custom policy development, we connect designer to this integration server of API Gateway and can do policy development. So at that time, developers, replicators, etc., ACLs or user groups are used. Similarly, monitor users, if we have WM Monitor installed on API Gateway, this integration server, monitor users is needed. So normally, when we install API Gateway or when we are running API Gateway, the integration server only has WM API Gateway package. It is recommended that we do not install any other things over it, including monitor also, I think so. But if if we want to bring this integration server under, like if we want to do service auditing and monitoring, then we can configure the monitor, WM monitor, and that time the monitor users and ACLs will be used for integration server to talk to monitor and to the backend database, etc. But normally we do not do that. So if you are seeing other groups available on this integration server, they will still be there. But these groups and ACLs will not be viewed on the or cannot be seen on the this API Gateway web UI. And if you are talking about creating custom user groups and ACL, mostly those custom user groups and ACLs are needed for the backend flow services. So we create flow service and we assign certain groups and ACLs. So those flow services are developed on a different integration server altogether. So those flows are so the ACLs and user groups required to protect those flow services will be created on that particular integration server. For example, I have this native integration server where I'm running this the actual flow logic for Hello World API. Okay. So inside this this integration server, this is a different server. It's accessed via 6643 HTTPS port. If I log into this server, I will see my to run the Hello World flow service. I have WS consumer users user group is created, and that user group is tagged to some ACL called Hello World ACL. So this flow service related user groups and ACLs will still be part of your native integration server. On the API gateway, we only restrict to create groups and teams from this web UI. One word of caution, although like groups and teams, when we create them, they get converted into user groups and ACLs on the integration server. But please do not do the like create them on integration server and view it from here or use it from here. That is not recommended. The reason is if when we move to a production like setup where we have API gateways in cluster, when we create a group or teams from here use on one node, it gets replicated on the other clustered nodes. So it will the replication is handled by the clustering policy or clustering logic of API gateway. If we are creating some groups or users or teams like ACLs on the integration server of one node, the same information will not be replicated automatically on the other nodes. So whenever we are doing user management, and this is not just for user management, there are features which are present like can be configured from gateway web UI as well as integration server. For example, other good example is ports, the ports on which APIs will be invoked. So we can do it either from here or from the web UI or from the integration server, the traditional ports option. But it is always advised and recommended that these sort of configurations we do only using this web UI because especially in clustered scenarios, when we are creating it from this web UI, API gateway takes responsibility of replicating it to the other nodes. If we are doing it on integration server, the information will not be replicated. The configuration will not be replicated. And at runtime, we will get some different or we'll see some different behavior. So sorry, I digressed, but did I answer your question?
Yes, I get the point. I get the point.
Okay. Okay, so apart from this users, groups, and team configuration, we can also define like account settings. For example, we can define password restrictions like minimum characters, whether the password is non-expiry or is going to expire after certain days, etc. So we can do all of those here, and also we can configure account locking settings. So I think this feature you have already seen on integration server. So if a user or consumer is invoking an API using wrong passwords if this feature is enabled, after let's say 5 or 3 unsuccessful attempts, the user account will be locked for some amount of time. So if we enable it, we can define like what is the maximum login attempts, incorrect login attempts in like three attempts in 1 minute. And then we can lock out the user account for certain hours or days. So we can define this time period I mean, to unlock the account, or maybe we want to monitor which user account got locked, if it was and just accidental or intentional. Like in case of some brute force attack, the hacker can intentionally send some wrong password. So if that is the case, then we definitely need someone to monitor the reason why it got locked and understand whether it is safe to unlock the account or not. So based on those requirements, we can define this locking settings and what to do with the what to do after the account is locked. Okay. And last thing, we can also integrate with LDAP. So if we want to use our LDAP or AD account to log into to this UI, we can integrate with or configure LDAP. Let's say here. Um, we can add LDAP directory. We can define the user query like the CN, the OU, etc. How the user will be queried, and using our login LDAP or AD account, we can log into the to this UI. Same thing goes for your consumers. So if you have created consumer users like the authentication in LDAP, there are customers who do that they create the LDAP login for even the consumers. So we can validate the incoming login, or upon API invocation, whatever user ID is coming, we can validate them against the LDAP. So LDAP integration behavior is similar to how integration server works. So once LDAP is configured, I think on the first screen you saw there is something called, sorry about that. So cache size and credential time to live. So we can define how many users or how many users will be cached in API Gateway's LDAP cache, and what is the time to live. So we normally set, let's say, 1,000 users will be cached for 24 hours. So first time login, when it happens, the user is authenticated against LDAP, and then the user is cached if login is successful. And next time onwards, the user is authenticated against the local cache up to 24 hours, after which the entire cache gets what do you call, all the cache elements are cleaned up. And then again, API Gateway queries and fetches the user information, or upon the first time login, the information is fetched and cached. So this way the LDAP integration work. Of course, I cannot demo it because I do not have LDAP. But if you have LDAP or AD configured, you can seamlessly integrate API Gateway with LDAP. Same thing goes for developer portal also. So for internal use, like who can log into the web UI or who can do what, for that, we can configure LDAP users. And if we have groups also defined, we can configure the groups.
Okay.
So,
Okay, but about this configuration about the LDAP, as we are asking before, if the product is able to connect with the Active Directory Federation, so EDFS, so it can be automatically handled by the EDF service and back to the application with the authentication with the SAML response, so it can be enabled to user login.
yes, it can be.
So where this configuration have been done? Because I didn't find anywhere inside the product can be
No,
configured related to users.
yeah, I mean, under LDAP, you can, when it says LDAP, but you can configure the ADFS here as well. Your the directory URL will change, I guess, for ADFS. Is that your question, or?
Yes, we need to yani if the login required to redirect to the ADFS, so return back with the authentication token with the SAML configuration, so it allow user to be part of that.
Okay, I got it. So for SAML token configuration, it is done from here. So under administration security, there is the SAML issuer. So you can configure the SAML server URL here.
I believe this is routed to the API as a client from the client authentication. It is not for the management portal itself, for the developer or the administration.
No, I'm not getting your question. So your requirement is like when a consumer calls your API, they will send SAML token,
It is
and you
not
need.
about the consumer. It is about the user or and the administration group
Okay.
based as the SIEM policy and the login required to use EDFS as a SSO single sign-on for the
Yeah.
all application. It should be
Uh-huh.
used to login to the all
Yeah. Okay.
products.
Yeah, I got it. So for that, if you want to use your ADFS, you basically your enterprise account to log into API gateway, then you have to configure it here under LDAP configuration. From user management, LDAP configuration. And although it says LDAP, it is like for creating or adding your ADFS. You provide the directory URL and like the query to perform to fetch the user information.
Okay, I think it is maybe it is not what I'm asking. Maybe Nitrogen can help in this because he will work to configure this inside IMWE.
Okay.
So let's back to the account setting and the locking.
Okay.
Okay, if you are going to account lock, there is a set of exception list. If you are enabled to lock the account setting, and
Yeah.
there all users except defined users,
Yes.
where we are able to add these predefined users, or automatically it makes this administrator
No.
only outside this.
Exactly. So only administrator is configured as predefined user. So it is recommended that you select this option because you should not lock out the administrator under any scenario unless you have like another login option available. So predefined user, it is automatically identifies administrator as the predefined user and exempt that user or administrator from any account locking settings.
Okay, I get it. Thank you.
If all users, then administrator, if someone tries with the wrong password, that will be locked.
Okay.
So have like a separate admin account ready in case you want to lock admin or configure account locking for administrator user as well.
Okay, I thought so from the beginning there is a list of predefined user. Maybe we can set it as a specific user that not be,
Yeah,
but now
so
all admin
huh.
it should not be applied in this policy, right? That's it.
Yes.
Okay.
So also, if you want to identify which is your predefined user, the easiest way is to identify it by this delete symbols. So as you can see, under no condition, administrator can be deleted. So it is like an inbuilt user that comes, that gets created once we install. Any other user, like I have defined portal user, I have just created API user, etc. These can be deleted or removed or suspended, etc.
Okay, I got
So this is the easiest way for you to identify what is the predefined user.
Okay.
All right. So with that, we came to an end to this API gateway. Sorry, I was displaying it over here. Yeah, so we kind of discussed all this. I intentionally did not talk about this individual tabs inside the APIs because that we are going to cover in my next topic of creating an API. So apart from that, also policy will be covered during that. Apart from that, we have covered more or less all the features related or all the features available on API Gateway. I'm just going through this slide to to see if I have missed anything, or else I'll move on to the next topic of API creation.
Okay.
Okay.
Shall we get a break for 15 minutes so we
Yes,
can come
sure.
back and make this activity?
Yeah, sure. I'm okay with that. So
Okay.
just before we end this topic, let me just user group teams, functional privileges, user. Yeah, that's all we have covered. So okay, before we take a break, can I just cover this last slide on the API gateway? It is like a good representation of the API gateway architecture and how at runtime and design time, like what happens where, if you permit me just 2-3 minutes.
Yes, okay, no problem.
Okay. So basically, this is like the API gateway we have. So as I said, API gateway is a packaged application running on integration server. So this blue box is representing the API gateway plus the integration server. Now, API gateway is always backed by Elasticsearch, or we call it as API gateway data store or internal data store. So internal data store or API gateway data store is nothing but a solution built on Elasticsearch. So Elasticsearch is an open source product. So our product team has used Elasticsearch to create a data store where all the API information, design time as well as runtime information, the metadata of API is stored. Even like when a token is issued, the token is stored in Elasticsearch, and at runtime, it is fetched and it is cached and then validated against. So API gateway cannot run without this Elasticsearch. It is, if I have to draw a comparison, so it is basically like integration server always having to have connection with either embedded database or an external database. So Elasticsearch serves that purpose to API gateway. So if in case, we'll cover this in detail in administrator training. So you will often find that if Elasticsearch is not started correctly, you will see API gateway is not opening, the UI is not opening, or even the API gateway package is like not loaded correctly. So that will be your first clue to see whether your API gateway to Elasticsearch communication is happening correctly, or Elasticsearch has been started or not. So, so after this, sorry, where did I go? At design time, so service provider creates API on the gateway, and those APIs are published on developer portal. So we can configure this API gateway to developer portal connection. Now, on API gateway, after an API is created, we can define policies and we can define applications which are going to consume the APIs. Similarly, on developers portal, so this application creation can happen on API gateway. And if we have a developer portal configured, we can restrict the application creation to happen always via the developer portal. It may seem, this statement may seem little vague at this point, but we'll see how it works and what difference it makes. Okay, now at runtime, what happens is the client application actually hits API gateway to invoke an API. And whatever policies we have defined for the API at design time, those policies are executed. So threat protection, identification, mediation, transformation, everything gets executed. And if there are no policy violations, then API like API gateway transfers the request to my native service, and native service returns a response. That response goes back to the client application. So this is how overall, like the architecture, how each component is used at design and runtime, and what happens when an API is invoked. So that's all about the architecture and design time and runtime operations of the API gateway. So let's take a quick break of 10-15 minutes, and let's say, sorry, it's after 15 minutes, can we resume?
Yes, please.
Sure. So we'll see you after 15 minutes then. Thank you so far for your patience.
Thank you. Hi, Deepa. Shall we continue now?
Yes, I can continue. All right. Okay. So our next topic for the day, and probably this will be the last because after API creation, we will test the API and also will see some basic options of securing the API for identity management, etc. API creation in API Gateway, how can we do that? So just first 2, 3 slides I will go through, and then we will switch back to the API Gateway web UI. Okay. So as I said in the beginning of the session when we were talking about API gateway, there is absolutely no limit of how many APIs we can create and what types of API we can create. So whatever industry standard APIs are available, we can create all of them on the gateway. So as you can see from the Gateway Web UI, we can create REST, SOAP, OData, WebSocket, and GraphQL APIs. So to create an API, we can either log in as an administrator or like a user having API management privileges can log in and create the API. In order to create the API, we have to come to this API tab and from here select the Create API option. Now, API Gateway provides 3 ways of creating an API. One is importing the API definition from a file. The second is importing the API definition from a URL. And the third is creating API from scratch. So when we create an API definition from, when we create an API from a definition file, we can use a Swagger file for REST APIs or Swagger file for REST APIs. Similarly, RAML also for REST APIs. We can use WSDL for creating SOAP APIs. We can use GraphQL SDL for GraphQL API. Similarly, we can import the API definition from a URL. Like if we have a WSDL URL, we can use that to define, to import the SOAP API definition and create the API. We can similarly use a Swagger URL or a RAML URL. For OData, we can import OData metadata URL, etc. From scratch, we can like go stepwise to create the API and its resources and other technical information by using Create API from Scratch option. Right now, this option is limited to only REST type and WebSocket type API creation. Other APIs cannot be created using this method. So that's what this slide is talking about, that we have to go to this API tab and click on Create API to create the API, and we can choose any of these 3 methods for creating an API. So this slide, next slide, summarizes what are the supported API types and the specification in to define the API, the supported specific or the specification formats to define the API. So as I said, SOAP, for SOAP, we have WSDL definition. For REST, we have Swagger, RAML, and OpenAPI definition. For OData, we have OData metadata document or URL. For GraphQL, we get the definition from a GraphQL SDL. I think GraphQL, some definition language. And WebSocket, there is no definition available. We always have to create from scratch. The next slide summarizes the type and the options for creating the API. So as I said, as we saw, like 3 different ways possible: import from file. So using this option, we can create a REST, SOAP, or a GraphQL API by using Swagger, RAML, or OpenAPI definition file for REST APIs, WSDL file for SOAP APIs, and GraphQL SDL file for GraphQL. So we can use a single API file, or a single WSDL file, or can use a zip of WSDL, etc. Zip is like when, like for example, if the WSDL is using schemas, which are like referenced schemas. So we normally get like a WSDL and then the reference schema. So together they create a zip file. So we can use that zip file instead for creating SOAP API, for example. Similarly, the next option of creating API from by importing definition from URL is available for REST, SOAP, OData, and GraphQL. So all this WSDL, we can use WSDL URL or Swagger URL, and for OData metadata URL. And Scratch option, creating from Scratch option, is limited to REST and WebSocket. And publish from an integration server. So if we have integration server, if we have API gateway configured in integration server, we can directly publish the REST or SOAP APIs from there. It's there. Technically, it is achievable. I think from this Windows preferences, I think from destination somewhere we can configure the API gateway definition. But to be honest, I haven't done myself, or I haven't seen anyone doing so. Normally, we use the first 2 options for creating an API. Okay. So now I'll show you how to create APIs via the import option. So let me first give a brief overview of the backend service. So I have this Hello World service. This is the main service. It returns, it takes the input, it takes name as the input, and it returns a message with a timestamp. Okay, somewhere I have done this concat to get the timestamp, and it is returning the name and the timestamp. It's like this. Now I have created a REST resource from this Hello World service. The REST resource is like hello, and I have a Swagger definition available here. Swagger definition of this REST resource is available. Similarly, I have created a SOAP, a WSD, actually created a wrapper consumer service on this main service. And then from this service, I have created a provider WSD called Hello World. So WSDL is available, WSDL file is available. I can also use the WSDL URL. Okay. So let's try to create this API from V1 Hello World. So I'll use the file. The URL, using URL will yield the same result. So let's select the file. Let me copy this path. So this is the Hello World V1 WSDL file. If I select the file, and I can give a name. Type is WSDL. So whenever we are creating an API using any of this method, we have to give a version for this API. So this version in version number is important because API name plus the version, this combination has to be unique for importing or creating any APIs. So we can have APIs with same name as long as their versions are different, they can coexist. So if we can either define our own version, and if we do not define any version here in the version field, API gateway enforces a version by itself. So let's create this API. Let me also add a definition here, sorry, description of this API. Let's create the API. So API will be immediately created, and from the API details page, we can see the name and the version. As I said, if I do not provide a version, API gateway enforces a version for the API. I can see who has created the API because I have logged in as an administrator. So the owner is shown as administrator. Active state. So the state active is no, because when we are creating an API on gateway, by default, it stays at deactivated stage. After we edit, there are certain information to be edited for the API after its creation. We can manually enable it for API testing, etc. So initial state of this API is no, active equal to no. Then there is something called maturity state of this API. So it shows like at which stage the API is. So there are predefined maturity states available, like beta, deprecated, experimental, production, and test. So anything we are creating first gets assigned to this beta state, and we can also select any of the state. I mean, as per our wish, we can select any of the states to define its maturity state. API grouping is important if like when we are creating API catalog, we can create custom groups. So and assign those group names in for assign those group names to APIs. This is just like a logical grouping to assemble all your APIs together in one group, or if you want to search APIs based on group name. So for example, you can have multiple APIs that are searching custom employee information based on employee ID or other parameters. Okay, so we can group them all under one group, saying like employee or employee information or inquiry, something like that. So this is logical grouping that has got nothing to do with the API functionality. So I can, let's say I can assign the group called sign in. Also like API, okay, it has to be one of the, yeah. Also, like the group names are predefined, like the maturity states, and there are two parameters available under the extended setting. One for maturity, I think API gateway maturity state definition and API gateway API grouping definition. Some parameters are available, and there we can define like names for API groups or maturity state. So this is like out of the box group names. We can add or remove more group names to this list. Okay. Tags like for quick search. So this is like hello API. So I can say like message, it is just sending a message. So I can add a quick tag to this API. So at later point of time, when we do API searching on gateway, or especially on the portal, developer portal, we can use this tag name to search the APIs. So this way we can add tags. So tags, it's a free text field. So we can add any tag name here, and that will appear here. It need not be coming from a predefined list of APIs. And finally, the description. So API description is important. The more description you can provide is better, because this API in future may get published to the developer portal, and developer portal is all about sharing information about the API. So we can add more description here about the API, how this API is called, what it does, etc. Or under the documentation section, we can also attach a definition file. Definition file as in like a description file, like a release note or about the API kind of file. So we can create a simple text file or a PDF file, and we can attach it to this API under documentation. So when we publish the API to developer portal, this file also will be published and can be viewed downloaded and viewed from there. But at least provide some description over here to easily identify what this API or understand what this API is doing. Okay.
About this documentation, we have control about the documents. Maybe we have a set of documents related to a business or a backend configuration need to be kept it inside the gateway, and a set of documents maybe we need to be published to the public. We have this kind of information, or the all resources or all documentation related to the development and the business can be kept inside the central site as a resource and uh, discovery or resources related to the services.
What you just said is correct approach. So in Centra side, we can add all the business requirement test, etc. documentation. Okay. When I say like API documentation, please limit the information to API alone, because you do not want to share your business or backend service configuration to to all consumers or to the developers who are willing to use this API. So limit the documentation and only provide information about the API, not the business and all business requirement or functionality. So
this
what you said,
documentation only target the consumer only.
yes, yes. The
Okay.
information you want to share with the consumer, like what operations are there for this SOAP API, what operation does what. If you want to go little if you want to provide slightly more details, then you can say like what operation requires what parameters, the associated status and error codes, etc. But do not provide like your actual backend backend services specification or functionalities. Those are like private information, so need not be shared with consumers. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so as I said, like we can define our own version. So normally we go for this major minor version. So like 1.0, I'm defining the version for this API. So with all this information, I can save the API. So changes will be immediately reflected. Okay. Now, in the technical information section, so it will show, it basically is reading the WSDL. So in the technical information, it will show what native service or where the native service is hosted. So it is giving the server information and then the endpoint endpoint information. So Hello World WS provider V1 Hello World is my service or the WSD. Okay. And if I want to publish it back to Centra site, it will be created as a service registry. I mean, in the service registry, it will be displayed as Hello World V1 _1. So also under after technical information, we can see like the operation of this API. So basically all these information are coming from the WSD. We can see this is the information, this is the operation. The input request has the structure. It accepts name, a string parameter called name. and it returns a string parameter called message. And there is no custom fault message defined. If it is defined, it will be displayed over here. Now for SOAP API, there is an additional feature called REST transformation. So although rarely used, but we can create like a REST flavor of the SOAP API without having to create another separate API for Hello World. So what I mean is, like, here I have created a Hello World. I mean, as I just shown, I have created a REST resource for this Hello World service. And from that REST resource, I have created this Hello World REST API. And then I have created another SOAP API from the Hello World WSDL. So instead of having two different APIs, especially for SOAP APIs, we can use this REST transformation, and we can expose, REST transformation. And I can expose one or more operations for to be exposed as REST resources. And same API I can invoke using SOAP protocol as well as REST protocol. So, so this saves our effort, and also like the management of two different versions of the API. So this is one of the ways you can manage your SOAP and REST APIs. This feature is only available for SOAP APIs to be exposed as REST APIs. For REST APIs, there is no feature to expose it as a SOAP API. So there is this limitation. So let's keep it exposed this way. So, so this is all about the API definition. I'll come to this mocking part a little later. Okay. Now, when we are creating an API by default, so this is like the policy view, like the policies that are configured or we can configure for this API. So if I click on this policies tab, I'll see that there are already two policies defined. So whenever an API is created, API Gateway by default enforces these two policies. One is a transport policy, and another is a routing policy, and it's called straight through routing. Now, transport policy at a high level, it enables to expose the API over both HTTP and HTTPS. So by default, like when the policy is enforced by gateway, so by default HTTP is set. When we can also select HTTPS, or we can restrict the API invocation over HTTPS alone. So I'm keeping both HTTP and HTTPS. If it is a SOAP API, I can also do this version bridging by defining whether I want to expose it as a version 1.1 or version 1.2. And like one or the other is possible. So by default, it is created as 1.1. To be frank, I do not know what is the difference, implementation difference between 1.1 and 1.2. I have worked very little with SOAP APIs, to be frank. So let's just go with this standard settings. Okay. Now, apart from this transport, as I said, like routing policy, the straight through routing policies also gets assigned to this API. So straight through routing or any sort of routing policy defines where the API gateway will forward the request to. So basically the native services endpoint is defined in this routing policy. So since API gateway, like at the time of API creation, API gateway has read the WSD, and it identified the endpoint definition from the WSD, and it has automatically populated it here. So this is the exact endpoint we are also going to use. So I'm not changing it. Tomorrow or day after, when we talk about policies in details, we will see different routing policy options, and how even using straight through routing policies, what we can do. Okay. But at minimum, these two policies have to be configured or enforced, and routing policy is definitely needed if we want to send a request to backend. So with all this information, if we save this API, we can save this API, and let me just deactivate it and let's go back to the first stage. So this is like the first stage where when you are creating the API. Okay. Now, as I said, like from the API details page, we can see only this much of information. Okay. Now, when we are activating this API, we will see an additional detail getting added in this added on this page, which is called the gateway endpoints. So this gateway endpoints were previously not there, and upon activating the API, we get this gateway endpoints. So gateway endpoints basically tells you the API URL of the API. So when you are giving this API to your consumers, you will always share this gateway endpoint to them. Okay. Your native endpoint is hidden and it is only to be used by API gateway when forwarding the request to the backend. Apart from that, whenever the consumer is consuming the API or invoking the API, they will always use this gateway endpoint URL. Now, this is like the gateway endpoint by default generated by the API gateway. So we can customize it and we can add custom gateway endpoint. The reason we need to customize it because it says like WS Hello World V1, then the API version. Sometimes customers do want to hide all this information and mask it with some meaningful word. So instead of saying that it is Hello World V1 version, we can just name it as Hello World. So we can define custom endpoints here. So let's create this custom endpoint. So the custom endpoint definition will always have a protocol. So basically, whatever protocol you have enabled for this API, HTTP or HTTPS, then host and port. Then this is the format that is to be followed for defining the custom endpoint. So default prefix. So in case of SOAP UI, SOAP API, the default prefix gets generated at WS. For REST APIs, we will see the default prefix gets generated as gateway. So I don't think we have an option of changing the actual value of the default prefix. However, if we want to say this is like instead of WS, we can call it as SOAP. Then the API name, hello world. And version is very important because as I said, like the uniqueness of the API is defined by its name and the version. And API gateway always recommends that we include the version in the URL so that we can if there are like two different APIs available, by looking at the URL, the consumer can tell which version he or she is using. Okay, so let me change it back to WS. It will not make any difference, but yeah. So now my endpoint has become this HTTP, my server host port, WS Hello World 1.0, and my operation is Hello World. So if I have to create a SOAP project here, I can SOAP UI project from this URL. Yeah, I can do so. Rather, I have to import the new SOAP project. So in the SOAP and sorry, my mistake. I imported the wrong WSDL. Sorry, let me just remove it. I should have imported the WSDL from API Gateway. Yeah. So when we are sharing the API with the consumer, we have to share the WSDL of API gateway. The reason why is at later stage, we will see if we just want to enforce some WSS security for this API, because it is a SOAP API, we can enforce message level or transport level WSS policies. So if we just want to enforce those policies on this API, and like, let's say my native is not enforcing such WSS, then the change will be reflected or managed by the API gateway, and WSDL will be adjusted accordingly. So when we are sharing the WSDL link of the API or the API URL, please make sure to share the WSDL from the API gateway, not your native APIs, not your native services API. So let me create Hello World V1. So in this SOAP UI request, I can change the or it already, if because I have defined this custom endpoint, it is taking the custom endpoint as this. So if we delete it, if it will go back to this default endpoint defined by the gateway. So anytime we are generating this custom endpoint or editing the already generated custom endpoint, the WSDL keeps getting adjusted accordingly. So make sure if you are changing any of these details, make sure to share the latest WSDL with your consumer, or ask them to, if you are testing it from SOAP UI, just update the WSDL definition. So after this, this is like the endpoint. My operation name is Hello World. So I'll append Hello World after this URL. And this API is good enough for testing. So as I said, like this requires a name. It takes a name as an input. So let's try to test it, and it failed. 401 user application null. Okay, fine. So this way we can test the API. It is failing although, but yeah, we can test. Now, let's say this sort of failures are happening for my API. So I can use this tracer functionality to verify or to debug the API. So I can click on enable tracing, and this tracer view actually shows where exactly or which policy execution has failed for this API and why this error is coming. So let me test this API one more time, and it has failed, and let's refresh and see where exactly it has failed. So it is saying that it failed at the stage of routing the request to the backend. And it failed because the endpoint could not be reached. Maybe the endpoint is protected by some ACL or something. So that is why mostly like 401, when you get this error at the routing stage, it means that endpoint requires some authentication, and that authentication hasn't been configured in the API at the routing stage, and that's why it is failing. So if we keep scrolling down further, we will see that endpoint has returned. So basically, this tracer is a very good feature to debug this API, and it shows like general. Let me go one by one. So it shows the general information, like what time the API was invoked, what is the response time, etc. How long the native service has has taken to complete or fulfill the request. Then it shows API request and response, like what request has come through, what the URL that it has called, the request body or the request that the consumer has sent, then what response has gone back to the client and the response body as well. So response body says that native has sent this error. Then it further drills down to the request that was sent to the native service. So, and the exact URL of the native service. So native service is this, and it says like this request was sent as is, and native has responded back with 401 access to the web service descriptor denied. And then the response body sent by the native, and additionally it says the policy configuration parameters. So since it has failed in the routing, it will show like what is the endpoint that was evaluated, the other information, etc. So this tracer feature is important and useful when you are debugging an API for the very first time you are developing and testing. But keep in mind that when you are enabling this tracer feature, it logs huge load of information in API gateway. So this is, while it is a good feature for to help your help the developers, at the same time it is resource intensive. So please do not keep this tracer feature on for very long time, or do not turn it on in production. Otherwise, your API gateway will be flooded with the all this information, and your API gateway storage will be depleted very fast, and the performance will be impacted. So when you are doing this sort of debugging, keep it on. And once you identify the issue and fix the issue, immediately disable the tracing feature. Okay, now the issue from here, I can see that it says that native has denied the request because there is a permission issue. So it is possible that my native is protected by this custom ACL. So for this, for the time being, let me just switch it to anonymous. So which means that native doesn't require any particular user credential to be called. So let me test this test this API again, and now I can get a good response. So it returns a response saying, hello, John, local time is this. So if I refresh this tracer, I'll see that this time API has got executed successfully, and it has returned a 200 success error, 200 success status. And I can still view all the policy stages that were enforced and executed, and everything is showing success. So my debugging is done. I'm getting a good result for my API. So I can now disable the tracing. So this is the bare minimum thing that you need to do in order to create an API and test an API. Okay. Any questions or any doubt? I think you all have seen or done this many times, but just I'm like doing a recap on what we need to do in order for creating the APIs, etc. Okay. Any questions? I hope not on this. Okay. So, like what management we can do for this API? So we can create a new version of this API. So keeping the API definition same, etc. We can create, let's say, a 2.0 version. And if we create it, it will just show API, same name, same everything, just the version is different. So sometimes we do this thing in order to like, let's say in my test environment, we have,
Jasmine, can you back to the same point and create a new version?
yes. Which one did I create? Uh, oh, sorry. Let me just delete the version. I think it doesn't allow to create more than 2 versions. Let me just repeat this step and I'll come back to this. Yeah. Create a new version. Yes. What is your question now?
Even the service is not published or not activated, we can able to create the different version for the same service.
No, I
And
think I
seems
can.
like it is clone the service with the same configuration backend and just is changing the version, right?
Exactly. So I
Okay.
was, okay. So first to answer your question, no, I can create a new version even when the API is activated. I can create the version after deactivating the API. So both ways it is possible. Okay.
Okay.
So now creating the version, as you pointed out rightly, that it is just changing the version number and retaining all other configurations. So why we need to do that? Rarely we do so, but sometimes we do, because let's say my original version has lots of policies enforced and all, and I'm seeing like there is some issue with the API. So a developer can come here and create his or her own version to do some debugging. I mean, without disturbing the actual API or without disturbing the consumer application, I can have a different version created and can do my own testing, and also can adjust this tags to indicate that this is just a temporary one or an experimental API, etc. Can do a debugging of this API to see what is wrong, or yeah, I mean, some more features I can add. If I want to add a new policy, I may like to see how the behavior is. So for doing all these things, we can create a new version. Now, also it is done to update the definition of the API. So let's say now I am on version 2.0 and I can update the definition of this API. Okay, now I can have a new WSDL ready with me that has enhanced request or response structure. So using this update option, I can select like, let's say V2 version I'm selecting of the WSDL, and I can keep the name same or can change the name also, and can update the API. So this time my the API configuration, the definition of the API is getting updated. So this way we can like create a fork into a new version, either to do some testing, or we can actually update the API definition, keeping the name same. So versioning, I hope, is clear now. So yeah. So let's go back to this Hello World V1 version, version 1.0. So we just tested this API. Oh, and one more thing, if we want to update the API definition, definitely we have to deactivate the API first and then update it. When the API is activated, we cannot update the update the definition of the API. So if we want to update, we have to deactivate it first and then update the versions. So we created this basic API and tested it, and we got a response back. Now, because we have like the backend ready, we can directly test the API along with the backend service. Now, there are cases when we have to, or when backend is not ready, yet we have to share this API with some other teams so that they can start their own development, because they are consuming our API and building their own applications. So they need to do some kind of testing or do like a mock run to see API, what the API is returning, etc. Maybe some policy also they want to evaluate identification, whether the consumer identification is happening or not, etc. So for these reasons, when specifically like especially when backend is not ready, we can take help of API mocking. So what mocking does is we can set some predefined responses that the API should return when it is successful, when it is failing. So we can set those predefined responses under API mocking. And at runtime, what will happen is if mocking is enabled and responses are available, then at runtime, API gateway will not send the request to the backend. Rather, it will take the response from those mocked I mean, it will just return the mocked responses. So this is very useful when you, for two purposes. One is just explain when your backend is not ready, yet you want to test the API, or your consuming application is wanting to test the API. The second use case is there are situations when we want to isolate the API gateway from the backend and do performance testing for API gateway alone, or for this API alone. So if we keep native connected, I mean API gateway connecting to native, what happens is the response time includes the response time taken by the native application or native integration server. So that may not give us the desired result. If we just want to validate how API is performing, we can isolate them, we can enable mocking, and we can run a performance test for this API to see how is the performance, measure the SLA or count the TPS, etc. So for that purpose also mocking is useful. Now, how we can do the mocking? First thing, we have to deactivate the API first, and then we will get the option of enabling mocking. So if we click on this enable mocking option, so now we can configure mocked responses. So let's click on this API mocking. So the mocked response, it says like the status code. So the API or the SOAP API is supposed to send 200 as a success status code. So I have verified this API previously, and I have captured the mocked response. So the same thing. So it's John, but date is okay. So let me just change the name to, let's say, Adam. So I can set this predefined response here. Click on edit and API mocking, and there are too many edit options and delete options, so be careful what you are editing. For 500, I'm not changing the response back. So I'm keeping like whatever is there. So I'm not changing anything here. So let's save it and activate it. So let's see what happens now. And let's enable tracing. And let's call this service with the input as John, but the response will come back as Adam. Like hello Adam, and whatever mocked response we have set. So this is showing an old time. So this way we can also, like from the tracer view, we can see like all policies got executed, but it is just like a dummy policy, especially the routing, because actually the request has not been routed to the endpoint. So even if we set a wrong endpoint here, it still doesn't matter, because let's say I'm changing the port to it still doesn't matter, because API gateway will see that mocking has been enabled, and it will always take the response from the mocked responses. Now, one thing I'm not showing here, but this is also possible to do. Let me go back to the mocking. So I showed you one way of mocking the response. So basically, whatever response you have got, you can directly copy paste it here under the mocked response. Let me deactivate the, come on, deactivate. So we can straight away set the response here under 200 or 500 status code. There are two other options available to mock the response. One is invoke an ESP service. So instead of hard coding the response, I can run or call a flow service which will return a mock response. So when I say this running a flow service, always remember that this flow service has to be on the integration server of the API gateway. So it does like a local. So this option only allows local invocation of the flow service. Hence, the flow service has to be residing on the integration server of your API gateway. So I can connect my API gateway, my designer to API gateway, and can define like a package here, package service, etc. So flow service definition, like how you do normally, same way you will do, but it has to be done on the integration server of the API gateway, and specify the namespace of the service and define which user is going to run the service. Normally, we use administrator user to run the service because these are like used for internal purposes. So administrator user is fine. So at runtime, when API gateway sees mocking is enabled and ESP service is configured, so it will always go to ESP service first, execute that flow service, and return the response, or whatever response it is returning API gateway will take that as the mock response. Third option, like we can do mocking based on certain conditions. So condition, I do not know what to send here. So we can say like, let's say this is a very simple request. So if say like the request contains several other parameters, so I can use any of the parameters from here. So let's say I'm defining one condition, mock condition 1, and parameter is coming either in the body, request body, or in the request header. So header as in like the transport header. So I can define, let's say the request or parameter is coming in the transport header and some header element name. So some transport identifier, transport header identifier here, the header element name and the value. And then when this condition is matched, I'll return, let's say 200 OK status code, and can also define like a, let's say the same response I'm going to return, but let me try if I can add a header somewhere. I do not know if it will work or not, but let me try. So I'm sending this mock condition equal to true. So I'll use the same key parameter here. The value has to be true. So if this condition is met, then this will be returned text XML and with 200 status code. So condition is added, save, and let's activate the API. Yeah, it worked. So as you can see, so in this condition, I have defined like if this condition is met, then the response should change to, where is the condition? Sometimes it gets very difficult to identify. Yeah, if the sorry, here. If the condition is met, then it will return hello Jenny. If the condition is not met, it will fall back to the default mock response. So now the question is, if you are enabling multiple mocking options, let's say ESP service is also there, your condition-based mocking is also enabled, and your default mocking is also there. So API gateway at runtime runs a precedence logic. If ESP service is configured to return a mocked response, API gateway by default will execute that one and will ignore the condition-based mocking or the default mocking. So highest precedence is given to the ESP service-based mocking. The second precedence is given to mocked condition. So if a condition is defined, that condition is executed and matched, and then the response set against that condition is returned. If and then the lowest is given to the default. So if nothing is specified, then the default mock responses will be written. So since I have configured this condition, so always now I'll get Jenny in the response. So this is all about mocking. So if now my backend is ready, I can disable mocking. So in order to disable mocking, I can deactivate it and deactivate the API and can say disable mocking. So if you have set mocking, I will recommend, like, when you do not need it, just disable it, but keep the mocked responses there, because you never know when you need to use it. So keep the responses there and just disable or enable the mocking feature based on the requirement. Otherwise, you have to again put extra effort to set the mocked response. So this is all about API creation, testing, and using mocked response if my backend is not ready. So now my API will fail because I have changed the endpoint, invalid endpoint, as well as I have disabled the mocked responses. So now it is saying returning a different error, saying connection refused to the backend, downtime exception. So again, if I go to the tracer, it will say that routing has failed because I'm using a different endpoint this time. So let me correct it back. So this much is sufficient. I won't say sufficient. So this is like very basic how you can create and test your API for the initial phase. Now, what the API is missing is the security part of it. Okay. So the API currently is not using any authentication method to identify whether the request is coming from a valid consumer or not. So when we talk about API security, there are two aspects. One is the transport layer security. So which is like whether to use HTTPS or HTTP, which can be governed by this transport policy. So I have enabled both HTTP and HTTPS policy. So if I want to strictly enforce, like API calls must use HTTPS, I can keep HTTP only. So if I now test the API using HTTP port, it will return an error that service API encountered an error. The service cannot be found. Why it is okay? Service cannot be found. I'm not sure if for SOAP APIs the behavior is slightly different, because for REST APIs I have seen that it says the transport protocol is not supported. I'll test the REST API later and we'll see. But anyhow, the point is, if I want to enforce HTTPS protocol, I can do at the policy level, and I can just disable the HTTP port altogether, so that all requests will start coming using HTTPS protocol. So this is all about transport layer security. And along with HTTPS comes the need for using certificates. So definitely to establish SSL connection, we have to share the API gateway's service certificate to the consumer. And if we are enforcing two-way SSL, we have to have the client certificate installed in API gateway. So that is all about HTTP versus HTTPS protocol usage. The second thing is the authentication of the user. So how do we identify the user? I'm just going to cover this at a theory level, and tomorrow I will do more demo on this thing. Okay. So in order to protect the API, by I mean uh, we can define like specific authentication methods using which the consumer will call the API. So in order to do so, we can add different identify and access policies. So we are slowly moving into the policy stage. So the first policy that we always define is identity and access for the API. Now, under identity and access, there are different policy actions available. The most commonly used one is identify and authorize. So using this identify and authorize, we can define what identifier will be used to call this API. Also, we can define whether anonymous access will be allowed for this API invocation or not. So when we add this identify and authorize policy, I can see it lists out different types of identification. So API key, HTTP basic authentication, JWT, OAuth token, etc. So at this moment, I'm just going to select HTTP basic auth and will select this option. I'll explain why I'm selecting application lookup condition as a global application and default application. So for now, I am adding HTTP basic authentication as an identifier for this API invocation. And also like keeping allow anonymous equal to false. Otherwise, like if I'm setting allow anonymous equal to true, then the identifiers, like whatever identifier comes, it will completely be bypassed and API invocation will still happen. Also notice that all these identification types can be used using AND condition or condition. So I can choose API key and HTTP basic authentication. Both, I mean, I can enable both this option and still can keep this condition type as OR, meaning at runtime, either API key will come or HTTP basic authentication will be present in the transport layer. And based on that, API gateway will identify the consumer. So let me unselect this. So I'm setting HTTP basic authentication. So let's save it. Now, so after saving the the policy configuration, it will look like this. Now, if you remember, I have already created like during the user management session, I have created this API user. So I'll try to call this API. Let's first call this API without any HTTP basic auth, and let's see what happens. So since API is now enabled to use HTTP basic auth as an identifier, as an incoming identifier, now I'm getting 401 unauthorized in the response saying user cannot be identified. And also if I open the tracer view, it says the same thing, that identify and authorize policy execution has failed because there is no user definition or user identifier given in the transport layer. So let's add authentication to this API. So in SOAP API, I'm configuring API user 1 and password is 123. Let's test this API again. So again, now I'm getting a good response. So this time API has got executed successfully. It correctly identified that some incoming the transport header request transport header has API user. It identified the API user as a user present in API gateway local user, and it could validate the user, and hence the API invocation was successful. Okay. Now, this is like, okay, sufficient because I can at least protect the API using some user ID password. But still, it is not fully protected because I still cannot achieve authorization using this mechanism. I cannot achieve many more things, but the first thing that comes in mind is authorization. So what I'm doing here is like whatever user I have created on locally on the gateway, API gateway, I can use any of those users to invoke this API. But my intention can be like, I don't want a certain user to call a certain API. So how do we prevent that from happening? Because currently, like if the user is present in the gateway, so there is another user called portal user, or even administrator is there. So I can invoke the same API using administrator user. It will still return, it will still identify the user name coming in the transport layer as a valid user, and it will allow the API invocation. So when using this identify and authorize policy, and you will notice this difference later on when we move on to API key-based authentication or JWT or OAuth token-based authentication. This identify and authorize policy action implicitly grants authorization to the user. So basically, it does both. So it identifies the user as long as the user is present and can be identified. It grants the API invocation implicitly to that authorization. So if we want to restrict that, if we want to say like, okay, only API user one should be able to invoke the API. And let's say when we are calling the API using administrator user, API should not get invoked. So additionally, what we can do is we can use this authorize user policy and can say like, okay, I want API user one to be added as an authorized user who can invoke this API. So now what will happen at runtime is still I'm using administrator as the user passing administrator in basic auth. So this time I will get an error saying API gateway has returned this error that authorization failed. User is not authorized or part of authorized group. So this time my tracer will say like instead of 401, 401 is when user is I'm sending a wrong credential or not sending any credential. 403 is for unauthorized access. So under this identify and access policy stage, I will see that identify and authorized action got executed successfully because it found administrator username in the request authorization header. It came in the transport layer authorization header, and administrator could be identified as a valid user. But the next action of authorized user has failed because administrator is not present in the list of authorized user. Only API user is allowed to call this API. So now if I change the user name back to API user one and password to 123, again, I'll get a good response for this API. So this way we can restrict who can actually access the who can actually access this API. So when we are doing basic authentication, in addition to identify the consumer by the username and password, we can also apply this authorized user policy to limit or restrict the access of the API. So even though the user is identified, this authorized user action, authorized user policy action will validate whether the user is authorized to invoke this API. So there are two concepts here. One is identify and authorize, one is authorized user. So identify and authorize implicitly grants user the permission to access the invoke the API. Once the user is identified, the user implicitly gets permission to invoke the API. If we want to add another layer of security, we can use this authorized user policy action and can restrict API invocation to a particular user or to a group of user. So in this authorized user policy stage, I have added a list of user, right? So instead, I can add, let's say, API consumers as the group of authorized users who can access this API. And now let me go to the user management and change this group setting and add administrator under this group. So now if I call this API using administrator, manage, this time I'll get a good response for this API. So API invocation will be successful because administrator is now part of the authorized user group who can call this API. So this way we can use basic auth and additionally use the authorized user basic auth to first identify the consumer and then additionally use authorized user to see whether the user is a valid user or not. So this is all about identify and authorize policy given the identifier is coming in the request transport header. Now, since we are dealing with SOAP APIs, so SOAP APIs additionally provides message level authentication or the WS username token or timestamp. So particularly for SOAP API, we can implement those policies by using this inbound auth method. And we can select what should be my authentication method. So either request WS username token or let's say required timestamp, etc. So remember all this inbound message level authentication I'm doing only at the API gateway layer. My backend is like normal flow service. It does not have any such WS WS policy enforced. So we can there can be scenario, I'm not sure what you are exactly following in your MOE landscape, but we can have both solutions available. One is either I'm enforcing all this inbound authentication method, like all these WS policies at the API gateway layer, and native is not enforced or protected by this WS policies. Or the second option is native is protected by WS policy actions, and I'm using the same service as is and creating the API. So when API request comes from the consumer, they already come with the all the required WS user token or timestamp, etc. And my native validates the incoming security header, the SOAP envelope security header. So both ways are possible. Based on the requirement, you decide whether you want to limit this usage of a WS security policy at the API layer, or you want to do all this validation at the native. So I'm just going to show how we can restrict the usage at the API layer itself and not pass the same to the native. So if I'm just receiving, if I want to do all this validation on the inbound message, I can add this policy here and can define what what will be asserted at the time at runtime. So I'm not going to use signature and all. Those are complicated to implement and demo. So I'm just keeping it simple to use required WS username token and required timestamp. Now, before that, I want to show you another thing. I'll just take extra 2-3 minutes time. I hope that is okay. Let me just go back to the API description. So if I open this WSDL as is, like this is before enforcing those WS policy. So I can see this is like a normal WSDL. There is no WS policy enforcement here. Now I'm turning on this inbound authentication message based WS based authentication and require and required timestamp and save it. Inbound authentication cannot be hello. Oh, okay. Rest transformation, disable rest. Activated. Yes. Now, if I again try to refresh this WSDL, this time this time around I'll see all the policy details got enforced to the the WS policy got enforced and the WSDL has also changed. So this is why I said if you are enforcing anything that readjusts the WSDL, do not forget to share it with the customer or consumer because they need to use the right WSDL for every change you are making. So I'll just update the definition of this WSDL. Okay. Now, if we do not send any of the WS security tokens, so it will say like security header in request is missing. Also, my API gateway tracer view will show that it has failed. Okay. It is not showing. Oh, the policy itself not got executed, I guess. Okay. Let me add the username token and timestamp. I think still it will fail because API gateway by default request for signature, which I have not done. So it will still fail, but at least this time it will accept the request with the WS header. I mean, what I'm trying to say is previously it was saying that API is expecting this WS security header to come part of the request, but it was missing. This time around, I'm sending it, but since I have not done the proper setup of signing the request using the public key, so the error message got changed into that message is not signed. So if I have like proper configuration in SOAP UI to sign the message using public certificate of API gateway, etc., then I can achieve this thing. But my intention is to show like how we can enable message-based authentication for inbound request without disturbing the endpoint. Can define all this policy only at the API layer and not disturb the endpoint layer. And let's do all the validation in this layer. So this is like one way of achieving separation of concerns. So what it means is like we are letting the backend application to do its own code functionality. So it is supposed to return a response back saying the name and the timestamp. So it is doing that, and all this operation, the security policy implementation, etc. It's like managing how we want to govern the communication from the consumer to the API gateway, then to the native. So we can have all this done by API gateway alone. API gateway can take care of all the security operation related activities and let the native endpoint do its own core functionality. So this may be a simple example, but if we there could be complex scenarios if we let all native do all these additional activities, then they may take additional time to process the request, do this. There are complications for the native applications. I mean, not all the time we are dealing with native like flow service, another integration service flow service as a native, but we may be actually talking to the core application. There are use cases where we take the API straight from the core application and expose them on gateway as APIs. So in those scenarios, if we allow or let the native doing all this processing, all this implementation, it can get complicated for them because there are like very old technology being used which are not supportive of these features. So without disturbing the native, we can manage all this in the API gateway. This is one of the simplest example. And API gateway on its own can handle this kind of requirement. So security is one of them. As we progress further, we will see like API gateway can do some kind of request transformation, etc. before going the request being sent to the native or native doing all the processing by itself. So that's all about how we can secure our API by enforcing identify and authorize policy action, which takes the information, user information from the transport layer. Additionally, we can set a list of authorized user or user groups to restrict the API invocation to a defined user, to a defined set of user. And then the third option is only for SOAP APIs, particularly, we can use WS tokens to do a message level authentication. So along with user ID password, we can also send the username token, timestamp token, etc. in the inbound request, and API gateway can do the validation based on that. So I will stop here today because I have completed today's agenda of securing APIs, both using transport layer and message layer identifiers. Tomorrow, we will start with application creation, and we will see how using application, we can use different other techniques, not just HTTP basic auth, but other techniques to identify a consumer at runtime. And yeah, we'll see some more advanced technique. And also tomorrow we'll start learning about policies in details. So that's all for today from my end. Let me ask you if you have any question. I hope you are able to follow what I'm trying to demo here. So let me know if you have any questions on the topics I have covered so far, or specifically on the identity access policy. So all good or?
Yes, thank you, Deep.
Sure. So I'll stop the recording now and we'll